"Mom, I think your left foot is supposed to go where your right foot is," Magnolia Griffin said with a gentle smile, watching as Harold Jenkins attempted what could generously be called a dance move, but looked more like he was trying to untangle himself from an invisible spider web. The Tulsa Community Fitness Center's mirrored studio echoed with the sounds of Latin music and the occasional grunt from seniors who had clearly overestimated their hip flexibility. Magnolia, at 34, had seen her share of enthusiastic beginners, but this Tuesday morning Zumba class for seniors was proving to be particularly creative. "I don't think my left foot has talked to my right foot since 1987, Harold wheezed, causing a ripple of laughter through the group of 15 silver-haired dancers. That's when Magnolia noticed him. Tall, slightly awkward, standing in the back corner like he was hoping the mirrors wouldn't reflect his image. Unlike the other participants who embraced their lack of coordination with humor, this man looked genuinely distressed by his inability to follow the basic steps. "You know what? Let's take a quick water break," Magnolia announced. But instead of heading to the water fountain, she found herself walking toward the mysterious newcomer. "First time?" she asked, trying not to smile at the way he was staring at his feet, as if they had personally betrayed him. "Is it that obvious?" He had a nice voice, warm but reserved, with just a hint of self-deprecating humor. "Well, most people don't approach Zumba like they're solving a complex mathematical equation," Magnolia replied, extending her hand. "I'm Magnolia Griffin, but everyone calls me Maggie." "Peter," he said, shaking her hand. His grip was firm, confident, a contrast to his earlier performance. "Peter Hopkins." "Well, Peter Hopkins, the secret to Zumba isn't perfection. It's about letting go and having fun. Here, let me show you." She moved to stand beside him, demonstrating a basic step-touch combination. "See? Nothing fancy, just feel the rhythm." As she guided him through the movements, Magnolia couldn't help but notice how he seemed to analyze each step before attempting it. Most people just jumped in and figured it out as they went, but Peter approached it like he was studying for an exam. "You're thinking too hard," she said, placing her hand lightly on his arm. "Dance is about feeling, not thinking." "I'm not very good at the feeling part," he admitted, and something in his voice made her look at him more carefully. Before she could respond, a voice called out from across the room. "Peter, honey, you're doing wonderfully. Don't let perfectionism ruin the fun." Magnolia turned to see Mrs. Eleanor Whitfield, one of her favorite students, waving enthusiastically. At 78, Eleanor was elegant in a way that suggested she had been quite the beauty in her youth. She had joined the class 3 weeks ago and quickly became the unofficial cheerleader for anyone struggling with the routines. "Mrs. Whitfield is right," Magnolia said, turning back to Peter. "The goal isn't to win a dance competition. It's to move your body and smile while you're doing it." "I'm not sure I remember how to do either of those things," Peter replied, but there was a hint of a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Well, start with the moving part, and I'll work on the smiling later," Magnolia said, restarting the music. "Everyone, let's try the grapevine again, but this time I want you to imagine you're at a family barbecue and your favorite song just came on." The class erupted in laughter and chatter as they began the movements again. Magnolia found herself glancing at Peter throughout the rest of the session, noting how he gradually began to relax, his movements becoming less mechanical and more natural. After class, as the participants were gathering their things, Eleanor approached Magnolia with a knowing smile. "That young man seems nice," she said casually, but Magnolia caught the calculating look in her eyes. "He's just a student, Mrs. Whitfield," Magnolia replied, wiping down the mirrors. "Oh, I know, dear, but sometimes the best things in life come disguised as students." Eleanor's smile was mysterious, almost secretive. "You know, he reminds me of someone I used to know a long time ago. Same intensity, same way of holding himself apart from the world." Before Magnolia could ask what she meant, Eleanor had gathered her things and was heading toward the door. But she paused at the threshold and turned back. "Magnolia, dear, be careful with that one. Some people carry more than just awkward dance moves. They carry secrets that could change everything." And with that cryptic warning, Eleanor Whitfield walked out of the studio, leaving Magnolia staring after her with a growing sense that her Tuesday morning Zumba class had just become much more complicated than she had ever imagined. "So let me get this straight," Magnolia's best friend Jenny said, nearly choking on her coffee. "You're telling me that Mr. Two Left Feet made you forget how to breathe just by asking if you wanted to grab lunch?" They were sitting in their favorite cafe on Cherry Street, the Tuesday afternoon sun streaming through the windows and casting golden highlights in Magnolia's auburn hair. After 3 weeks of Peter attending her Zumba classes, he had finally worked up the courage to suggest they continue their conversation over food. "It wasn't the lunch invitation," Magnolia protested, stirring her latte with unnecessary vigor. "It was the way he asked, like he was genuinely afraid I might say no. And that's unusual because most men who ask me out act like they're doing me a favor. Peter acted like I would be doing him one." Jenny raised an eyebrow. "Interesting. And what about the mysterious Mrs. Whitfield? Still making cryptic comments about your dance student?" Magnolia sighed. "Yesterday she told me that some people's pasts have a way of catching up with them, and when they do, everyone nearby gets swept up in the tide. I asked her what she meant, but she just smiled and said I'd understand soon enough." "Okay, that's officially creepy," Jenny said, leaning forward. "What do you actually know about this Peter guy?" I don't know. Different. He's incredibly polite, almost old-fashioned. He always thanks me after class, like I've just given him some precious gift, instead of trying to teach him how to shake his hips without looking like he's having a medical emergency. What does he do for work? He's been vague about that. Something in education, he says, but he has this way of talking about it that makes me think there's more to it than he's letting on. Jenny's expression grew more serious. "Maggie, honey, I love that you always see the best in people, but maybe you should be a little more careful. I mean, what if he's married? What if he's running from something?" "He's not married," Magnolia said quickly. "No ring, and he mentioned living alone with his rescued dog, Buddy. How do you know the dog's name, and not what he does for a living?" That was a fair point. Magnolia had learned that Peter had found Buddy wandering around the fitness center's parking lot and had taken him in, despite admitting he had never owned a pet before. But when she had asked about his work, he had changed the subject with such skill that she hadn't even noticed until later. "I think he's just private," she said, but even as she said it, she wondered if she was being naive. "Well, private is one thing, secretive is another." Jenny finished her coffee and stood up. "Just promise me you'll be careful, and maybe do a little digging before you fall head over heels for a man who might be too good to be true." After Jenny left, Magnolia sat alone with her thoughts. She had to admit that there was something almost surreal about Peter's presence in her life. He was polite to the point of being courtly, intelligent without being condescending, and had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard. But there were also the little things that didn't quite add up. His clothes were simple but clearly expensive. He drove a modest Toyota, but she had noticed his watch. Definitely not something you picked up at a department store. And then there was the way he sometimes spoke, with a formality that suggested he was more accustomed to boardrooms than dance studios. Her phone buzzed with a text message. "Peter, would it be presumptuous of me to ask if you'd like to grab dinner instead of lunch? I know a place that serves the best chicken and waffles in Tulsa." Magnolia smiled despite her concerns. Who used the word presumptuous in a casual text? She typed back, "Only if you promise to attempt the chicken dance if the mood strikes you." His response came quickly, "I make no such promises. My chicken dance might actually violate several city ordinances." Laughing, she agreed to meet him at the restaurant. But as she walked to her car, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was stepping into something much bigger than a simple dinner date. Meanwhile, across town, Eleanor Whitfield sat in her elegantly appointed living room, holding a faded photograph and a letter that had been unopened for 40 years. She had recognized Peter Hopkins the moment he walked into that dance studio, though he had no idea who she was. She had been waiting for this moment for 4 decades, wondering if she would ever have the chance to right the wrongs of the past. Now, watching the way he looked at Magnolia, she knew the time had come. But first, she had to figure out how to tell them both the truth without destroying the fragile connection they were building. Because Peter Hopkins wasn't just a man learning to dance. He was the key to a family secret that had shaped both their lives in ways they couldn't begin to imagine. The restaurant Peter had chosen was a charming little place called the Broken Egg, known for its comfort food and cozy atmosphere. As Magnolia walked in, she spotted him immediately. He was sitting at a corner table, looking like he was rehearsing conversation topics in his head. "You made it," he said, standing up with a smile that seemed both relieved and nervous. "Did you think I wouldn't?" she asked, settling into the chair across from him. "I've learned not to take anything for granted," he replied, and there was something in his tone that made her wonder what experiences had taught him that lesson. As they ordered, chicken and waffles for her, the salmon for him, Magnolia found herself studying his face more carefully. He was handsome in an understated way, with kind eyes and a jawline that suggested he took good care of himself. But there was also something guarded about him, as if he was constantly monitoring what he said and did. "So," she said, after the waiter had taken their order, "tell me about your work, and don't say education and change the subject. I'm genuinely curious." Peter's fork paused halfway to his mouth. "You're very direct, aren't you?" "It's one of my more charming qualities," she replied with a grin, "along with my ability to make grown men look like they're having seizures while trying to dance." That earned her a genuine laugh. "Okay, fair enough. I run a series of private schools and educational centers. We focus on providing quality education in underserved communities." "That's noble work," Magnolia said, and she meant it. "What made you get into education?" "My father started the company," Peter said, his expression growing more serious. "He believed that education was the great equalizer, that it could lift people out of poverty and give them opportunities they wouldn't otherwise have. After he died, I took over with the goal of expanding that mission." "And have you? Expanded it, I mean?" "We've grown, yes. But sometimes I wonder if we've lost sight of the original mission. My family, they have different ideas about what success looks like." Before Magnolia could ask him to elaborate, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Ask him about the Hopkins Foundation. Ask him why he's pretending to be something he's not." Magnolia stared at the message, her heart beginning to race. "Excuse me," she said, standing up abruptly. "I need to use the restroom." In the bathroom, she stared at her reflection in the mirror, trying to process what she had just read. Someone was watching them, someone who knew more about Peter than he had revealed. But who? And why? When she returned to the table, Peter was looking at his own phone with a frown. "Everything okay?" she asked, trying to keep her voice casual. "Just work stuff," he said, but she could tell he was troubled by whatever he had seen. They finished their meal with polite conversation, but the easy rapport from earlier had evaporated. Magnolia found herself analyzing everything Peter said, looking for inconsistencies or signs of deception. As they walked to their cars, Peter seemed to sense her change in mood. "Did I say something wrong?" he asked, stopping beside her car. "No, it's just—" She hesitated, then decided to be direct. "Peter, are you being completely honest with me? About who you are, I mean." He was quiet for a long moment, and she could see him wrestling with something. "Everyone has parts of themselves they keep private," he said finally. "That doesn't mean they're being dishonest, but it doesn't mean they're being honest either." They stood there in the parking lot, the tension between them palpable. Finally, Peter stepped closer, and for a moment she thought he might kiss her. Instead, he reached out and gently touched her cheek. "I would never hurt you, Magnolia," he said quietly. "I hope you can believe that, even if you can't believe anything else." After he left, Magnolia sat in her car for a long time, staring at the mysterious text message. Finally, she Googled Hopkins Foundation. What she found made her stomach drop. The Hopkins Foundation was one of the largest educational charities in the country, founded by the late Gerald Hopkins and now run by his son, Peter Hopkins, who was worth an estimated $50 million. The man who had been struggling with basic dance steps, the man who had seemed so genuinely nervous about asking her to dinner, was one of the wealthiest people in Oklahoma, and he had been lying to her from the moment they met. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a photo. Peter in a tuxedo standing next to a beautiful blonde woman at what looked like a charity gala. The caption read, "Meet Peter Hopkins' fiancée, Victoria Sterling. Wedding planned for next month." Magnolia stared at the image, feeling like she had been punched in the stomach. Not only was Peter rich and lying about it, but he was also engaged to someone else. She was about to drive home when she noticed a figure standing under a streetlight across the parking lot. It was Eleanor Whitfield, watching her with an expression that seemed both sad and resigned. As their eyes met, Eleanor raised her hand in a small wave, then turned and walked away, leaving Magnolia with the unsettling feeling that the elderly woman had somehow orchestrated this entire evening. "I can't believe you're defending him," Jenny said, pacing around Magnolia's small apartment, while her best friend sat curled up on the couch, still in her pajamas, despite it being 3 in the afternoon. It had been 2 days since the dinner revelation, and Magnolia had missed both of her Tuesday and Wednesday Zumba classes, claiming she was sick, which wasn't entirely untrue. She did feel nauseated every time she thought about Peter's deception. "I'm not defending him," Magnolia said, scratching behind the ears of her orange tabby cat biscuit. "I'm just saying that maybe there's more to the story." "More to the story?" Jenny stopped pacing and stared at her friend. "Maggie, the man is a millionaire who's been pretending to be a regular guy, and apparently he's engaged to someone else. What more story could there possibly be?" "I don't know. It just doesn't feel right. The Peter I know wouldn't lead me on like that." "The Peter you know is a lie," Jenny said, but her voice was gentler now. "Honey, I know this hurts, but you have to face facts. Rich guys don't slum it in community center dance classes unless they're looking for a little excitement on the side." Before Magnolia could respond, there was a knock at her door. Through the peephole, she could see Eleanor Whitfield standing in the hallway, holding what appeared to be a covered dish. "Mrs. Whitfield," Magnolia said, opening the door. "How did you get my address?" "I have my ways, dear," Eleanor said with a mysterious smile. "May I come in? I brought you some chicken soup. I heard you were under the weather." Magnolia hesitated, then stepped aside to let her in. Eleanor's presence in her modest apartment was somehow both comforting and unsettling. "You must be Jenny," Eleanor said, extending her hand to Magnolia's friend. "I'm Eleanor Whitfield. I've heard so much about you." "I haven't heard anything about you," Jenny replied, shaking Eleanor's hand with obvious suspicion. "Well, that's about to change," Eleanor said, settling herself on the couch with the ease of someone who had been invited. "Magnolia, dear, we need to talk about Peter Hopkins." "There's nothing to talk about," Magnolia said, but she found herself sitting down across from Eleanor despite her words. "Oh, but there is. You see, you've only discovered part of the truth, and as my grandmother used to say, half-truths are often more dangerous than outright lies." Eleanor opened her purse and withdrew a manila envelope. "Peter Hopkins is indeed wealthy, and he does run the Hopkins Foundation, but the woman in that photograph isn't his fiancée. She's his ex-fiancée, Victoria Sterling. They broke up 6 months ago when she discovered he was planning to give away most of his inheritance to establish free dance and arts programs for low-income communities." Magnolia felt her heart skip. "How do you know all this?" "Because, my dear, I've been watching the Hopkins family for 40 years, waiting for the right moment to tell them the truth about their past." Eleanor's eyes grew distant. "You see, Peter's grandfather, James Hopkins, was my first love. We were engaged to be married in 1954. The room fell silent. Even Jenny seemed transfixed by Eleanor's story. James was from a wealthy family, but he was also a dreamer, much like his grandson. He wanted to use his family's money to help people, to create opportunities for those who had none. But his parents disapproved of our relationship. I was just a dance instructor from the wrong side of town. Eleanor's voice grew quieter. They told him I had died in a car accident, and they told me he had married someone else and moved away. We never saw each other again. James went on to marry a woman his parents approved of, and I spent the rest of my life wondering what might have been. But what does this have to do with Peter? Magnolia asked. Everything, Eleanor said, her eyes now bright with unshed tears. Because last month I received a letter from a private investigator I hired to find out what happened to James. He died 2 years ago, but before he died, he spent years looking for me. He never forgot Magnolia. He never stopped loving me. Eleanor opened the envelope and pulled out a stack of letters, all addressed to Eleanor Whitfield in careful handwriting. These are letters he wrote to me over the years, letters he never sent because he thought I was dead. In them, he talks about his son, Gerald, about how he regretted not following his heart, and he talks about his grandson, Peter, about how much he reminded him of himself at that age. She handed one of the letters to Magnolia. Read the last paragraph. Magnolia's hands trembled as she read aloud. I pray that Peter will have the courage I lacked, that he will follow his heart instead of his family's expectations. I pray that he will find someone who loves him for who he is, not what he has, and that he will have the strength to fight for that love, even if it means standing up to the people who think they know what's best for him. Peter doesn't know about these letters, Eleanor continued. He doesn't know about me or about his grandfather's true story, but I think he's living it anyway. I think he's found someone who loves him for who he is, and I think he's terrified of losing that because he's seen what happens when families interfere with matters of the heart. Magnolia looked up from the letter, her mind racing. So the reason he's been hiding his identity is because he's been hurt before by people who were only interested in his money. Victoria Sterling wasn't the first, Magnolia. She was just the most recent in a long line of women who saw dollar signs instead of the man. Jenny, who had been unusually quiet during Eleanor's story, finally spoke up. But why tell us this now? Why not tell Peter directly? Eleanor smiled sadly. Because I'm a 78-year-old woman who interfered in one love story 40 years ago, and I won't make the same mistake twice. Peter has to make his own choices, and Magnolia has to decide whether she's willing to fight for something real, even if it's complicated. She stood up, leaving the letters on the coffee table. The Hopkins Foundation is hosting a charity gala this Saturday night at the Philbrook Museum. Peter will be there, probably miserable and surrounded by people who only care about his bank account. If you want answers, if you want the truth, that's where you'll find it. As Eleanor moved toward the door, she paused and looked back at Magnolia. But be warned, dear, the truth is never simple, and fighting for love often means fighting against the people who claim to love you most. After Eleanor left, Magnolia and Jenny sat in silence for a long time, staring at the stack of letters that had just turned everything upside down. So, Jenny said finally, are you going to the gala? Magnolia picked up one of the letters and held it against her chest. I don't know. I don't even know if I can trust Eleanor's story. What if this is all just elaborate manipulation? What if it's not? Jenny countered. What if Peter Hopkins is exactly who you thought he was, just with a bigger bank account? That night, Magnolia lay in bed with Biscuit curled up beside her, reading through James Hopkins' letters. They painted a picture of a man who was deeply in love but trapped by family expectations, a man who spent his entire life regretting the choices he didn't make. By morning, she had made her decision. She was going to the gala, but she wasn't going alone. I can't believe you talked me into this, Jenny muttered, adjusting the straps of her borrowed evening gown as they walked up the steps of the Philbrook Museum. I can't believe you let me talk you into this, Magnolia replied, smoothing down her own dress, a simple black number she had found at a consignment shop, but that fit her like it had been made for her. The museum was transformed for the evening, with twinkling lights and elegant floral arrangements that probably cost more than Magnolia's monthly rent. Women in designer gowns and men in expensive tuxedos mingled in the gardens, champagne glasses in hand, their laughter echoing off the marble terraces. "I don't belong here," Magnolia whispered, suddenly feeling overwhelmed by the opulence around her. "Neither do half these people," Jenny replied, nodding toward a group of women who were clearly competing to see who could wear the most diamonds. "Money doesn't buy class, remember?" They made their way through the crowd, Magnolia's eyes searching for Peter. She found him near the museum's reflecting pool, surrounded by a group of older men in expensive suits who seemed to be hanging on his every word. Even from a distance, she could see the tension in his shoulders, the polite smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He looked every inch the wealthy philanthropist, but to Magnolia he still looked like the man who had been genuinely afraid she might say no to dinner. "There he is," she said, pointing him out to Jenny. "Wow," Jenny breathed. "He cleans up nice. But look at his face, he looks miserable." Before Magnolia could respond, a cool voice spoke behind them. "Excuse me, but I don't believe we've met." They turned to find a stunning blonde woman in a silver gown that probably cost more than Magnolia's car. She was beautiful in an intimidating way, with perfect features and a smile that was all teeth and no warmth. Victoria Sterling," she said, extending a perfectly manicured hand. "Peter's former fiancée." "Magnolia Griffin," Magnolia replied, shaking the woman's hand and trying not to wince at the strength of her grip. "Ah, the dance instructor," Victoria said, her smile becoming even more predatory. "Peter's told me so much about you." "He has?" Magnolia was surprised. "I didn't realize you two were still in contact." "Oh, we're not," Victoria said with a laugh that sounded like breaking glass. "But I make it my business to know who Peter is spending time with. It's fascinating, really, how he gravitates toward simple women when he's feeling rebellious." Jenny stepped forward, her expression dangerous. "Simple? Oh, I don't mean it as an insult," Victoria said, though her tone suggested otherwise. "It's just that Peter has always had this romanticized notion about real people. He thinks he can slum it for a while, play at being normal, but he always comes back to reality eventually." "And what reality is that?" Magnolia asked, fighting to keep her voice steady. "That he's a Hopkins," Victoria said, as if that explained everything. "That he has responsibilities, expectations, a position to maintain. That he can't just throw away his family's legacy for a temporary infatuation." "Speaking of family," Eleanor Whitfield's voice cut through the tension like a knife, "I believe there are some people Peter should meet." Eleanor appeared beside them, elegant in a deep blue gown that complemented her silver hair. But it was the elderly man beside her who made Magnolia's breath catch. He was tall and distinguished, with kind eyes and a gentle smile that seemed familiar. He was also the spitting image of what Peter might look like in 30 years. "Victoria, dear," Eleanor said sweetly, "I'd like you to meet Marcus Hopkins, Peter's great-uncle. Marcus, this is Victoria Sterling, Peter's ex-fiancée, who seems to have trouble understanding the meaning of ex." Victoria's face went pale. I didn't know Peter had a great-uncle." "Oh, there's quite a lot about the Hopkins family that Peter doesn't know," Eleanor said, her smile becoming sharper. "Marcus, why don't you tell us about your brother James?" Marcus' face grew sad. "James was my older brother, and he was the best man I ever knew. He was also the most heartbroken, because he spent his entire life believing that the woman he loved had died in a car accident." "That's impossible," Victoria said, but her voice lacked its earlier confidence. "Is it?" Eleanor asked. "Marcus, would you like to tell them about the private investigator your brother hired and what he discovered about his parents' lies?" As Marcus began to speak, his voice growing stronger with each word, Magnolia noticed that Peter had broken away from his group and was walking toward them. His expression was one of confusion and growing alarm. "Uncle Marcus," he said, reaching their small circle, "what are you doing here?" "I thought you were in Europe." "I was, Marcus replied, pulling his nephew into a hug. "But Eleanor contacted me last week and told me it was time to come home. Time to tell you the truth about our family." Peter's eyes found Magnolia's, and she could see the questions there, the uncertainty, but she could also see something else. Hope, maybe, or relief that the secrets were finally coming out. "Peter," Eleanor said gently, "there's something you need to know about your grandfather and about why he spent his life writing letters to a woman he thought was dead." What followed was the most surreal 20 minutes of Magnolia's life. Eleanor and Marcus told their story, while Peter stood frozen, his face cycling through disbelief, anger, and finally, a kind of heartbroken understanding. Victoria tried to interrupt several times, but Eleanor silenced her with looks that could have frozen champagne. "So you see," Eleanor concluded, "your grandfather James spent 40 years regretting the fact that he didn't fight for love. He let his family's expectations dictate his choices, and he never forgave himself for it." Peter was quiet for a long moment, processing everything he had heard. Finally, he looked at Magnolia. "Did you know," he asked quietly, "about any of this?" "Eleanor told me 2 days ago," Magnolia replied honestly. "But I came here tonight because I wanted to hear it from you." "Hear what?" "The truth, about who you are, about why you've been hiding, about what you want." Peter glanced around at the opulent party, at the people who had been surrounding him all evening, at Victoria, who was watching him with calculating eyes. "What I want," he said, his voice growing stronger, "is to get out of here. What I want is to go somewhere quiet, where we can talk without an audience. What I want is to dance with you properly this time, without worrying about what anyone else thinks." "Peter," Victoria said sharply, "you can't just leave. The Foundation's major donors are here. Your board members are perfectly capable of enjoying themselves without me," Peter interrupted, taking off his bow tie and shoving it in his pocket. "Marcus, would you mind making my excuses? Tell them I had a family emergency." "This is a family emergency," Marcus said with a smile that was identical to his nephew's. "Go on, son. Go live your life." As Peter took Magnolia's hand and led her away from the party, she heard Eleanor's voice behind them. "Some stories," the elderly woman said, "are worth waiting 40 years to see resolved." Later, much later, they would learn that Victoria Sterling had spent the rest of the evening trying to convince anyone who would listen that Peter had suffered some kind of breakdown. But by then, Peter and Magnolia were far away, dancing slowly in the empty fitness center studio, while Buddy the rescued dog watched from his bed in the corner, and the ghosts of old regrets finally found their peace. Epilogue. 1 year later. The Magnolia Griffin Center for Dance and Movement officially opened on a crisp October morning, with a ribbon-cutting ceremony that drew half of Tulsa's population and a surprising number of news crews. "I can't believe you named it after me," Magnolia said, watching as Peter adjusted the microphone for what felt like the 100th time. Even after a year together, he still got nervous before public speaking. "I can't believe you're surprised," he replied, straightening his tie. "It was your dream, your vision. The fact that I helped with the funding doesn't make it any less yours." The center was beautiful, a converted warehouse in the Arts District that had been transformed into a state-of-the-art dance facility with studios for every age and skill level. The best part, in Magnolia's opinion, was the sliding glass wall that opened to a small garden where outdoor classes could be held in good weather. "Besides," Peter added, "I tried to name it the Peter Hopkins Center for people who can't dance good, but my publicist said it was too honest." "Your publicist is a smart woman," Magnolia laughed, adjusting his tie for him. "Are you ready for this? Are you asking if I'm ready to give a speech in front of 300 people about the importance of accessible arts education? Or are you asking if I'm ready to do the chicken dance in public if someone requests it?" "Both." "Then no, I'm not ready, but I'm going to do it anyway." The ceremony was everything Magnolia had hoped for, and more. Eleanor Whitfield, now officially the center's historical advisor, a title she had invented for herself, gave a moving speech about the importance of following your dreams, no matter how long it takes. Marcus Hopkins, who had moved back to Tulsa and become a regular fixture in their lives, spoke about the legacy of love and the courage required to change course when you realize you're on the wrong path. Peter's speech was brief but heartfelt, focusing on the importance of community and the power of art to bridge divides. But the part that made Magnolia's heart swell was when he introduced her as the woman who taught me that the best dance moves come from the heart, not from a manual. The real surprise came after the speeches, when Eleanor stepped forward with a microphone and a mischievous smile. "Before we conclude today's ceremony," she said, "I have an announcement to make. Some of you may not know this, but I'm a bit of a matchmaker, and I'm proud to say that my greatest success story is standing right here." She gestured to Peter and Magnolia, who were holding hands and looking slightly alarmed. "Peter Hopkins, would you like to tell everyone what you asked me last week?" Peter's face went red, but he took the microphone with a sheepish grin. "I asked Eleanor for her permission to marry her surrogate granddaughter," he said, his voice carrying over the suddenly silent crowd. "And she said yes, but only if I did it properly." "And what does properly mean?" Magnolia asked, though she suspected she knew the answer. "It means in front of all the people who matter to us," Peter said, dropping to one knee right there on the center's polished floor. "It means with music, since that's how we met. And it means with dancing, since that's what brought us together." He pulled out a ring box, and Magnolia felt her knees go weak. "Magnolia Griffin," he said, his voice steady despite the 300 people watching, "you taught me that love isn't about having perfect moves. It's about being willing to look foolish for the right person. You taught me that the most important steps in life can't be choreographed. They can only be felt." He opened the ring box to reveal a simple, elegant diamond that caught the afternoon light and threw rainbows across the floor. "Will you marry me? Will you keep teaching me how to dance through life, even when I step on your toes?" The crowd held its breath. Magnolia looked down at Peter, this man who had stumbled into her life disguised as a clumsy dance student who had turned out to be so much more than she could have ever imagined. "Only if you promise to keep taking my classes," she said, her voice thick with tears, "because you still need work on your hip action." "Is that a yes?" he asked, hope and laughter mixing in his voice. "That's a yes," she replied, and as he slipped the ring onto her finger, the crowd erupted in cheers. But the best part came next, when Eleanor stepped forward with a portable speaker and announced, "Every proper proposal needs a first dance." As the opening notes of "At Last" filled the air, Peter stood and took Magnolia in his arms. They swayed together on the dance floor that would soon be filled with students of all ages, while their friends and family watched, and Buddy the dog barked his approval from the sidelines. "You know," Magnolia whispered as they danced, "I think your grandfather would be proud." "I think he would be," Peter agreed, pulling her closer. "And I think Eleanor planned this whole thing from the moment she saw us together." "Of course she did," Magnolia laughed. "She's been waiting 40 years to get her happy ending. She wasn't about to let us mess it up." As the song ended and the crowd began to disperse, Jenny approached them with tears in her eyes and a knowing smile. "So," she said, "I guess this means you're not available for girls' night next Friday?" "Actually," Magnolia said, "I was hoping you'd help me plan a wedding. Nothing too fancy, just something with good music and lots of dancing. And maybe some chicken and waffles," Peter added, causing everyone within earshot to burst into laughter. Later that evening, as they sat on the front porch of Peter's house, which was much more modest than Magnolia had expected, watching Buddy chase fireflies in the yard, Peter asked the question that had been nagging at him all day. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if Eleanor hadn't interfered, if she hadn't told you the truth about my family?" Magnolia considered this, absently playing with her engagement ring. "I think we would have figured it out eventually," she said. "Maybe not the whole story about your grandfather, but the important parts, that you're a good man who was scared of being hurt again, that you were looking for something real in a world full of people who only see dollar signs." "And what about you?" Peter asked. "What were you looking for?" "Someone who would dance with me even when they looked ridiculous doing it," she said, curling up against his side. Someone who would let me teach them something instead of pretending they already knew everything. Well, Peter said, kissing the top of her head, I hope you're ready for a lifetime of teaching, because I have a feeling I'm going to need a lot of lessons. Lucky for you, Magnolia replied. I'm a very patient teacher. As they sat there in comfortable silence, watching the stars come out over Tulsa, neither of them noticed Eleanor Whitfield's car parked across the street, or the satisfied smile on the elderly woman's face as she watched her greatest matchmaking success story unfold. Some love stories, Eleanor thought as she drove away, are worth waiting for, and some are worth orchestrating, even if it takes 40 years of patience and a little bit of divine intervention. The Magnolia Griffin Center for Dance and Movement would go on to serve thousands of students over the years, becoming a beacon for accessible arts education in Tulsa and beyond. But more importantly, it would stand as a testament to the power of following your heart, even when, especially when, it leads you to places you never expected to go. And if sometimes, late at night when the building was empty, people claimed to hear the sound of dancing coming from the main studio, well, some stories are too magical to be contained by the boundaries of reality.